Greetings again, most esteemed viewers, and welcome. This is the survey, if you will, my questionnaire for the input from my subscribers with respects to the protagonist I plan on playing. Now, depending on the input I see, the kinds of comments I see, I will choose one of these and go with one of these. Ultimately, I will be making my own decision, but it will be heavily influenced by you, the subscriber base, and I think that's just and right. A few things have been decided already that I probably won't sway from. First, I almost certainly will be playing one of the primary mare races. I know orcs are technically mare, but I will not be playing an orc. So my character will be either a Bosmer, an Altmer, or a Dunmer, or in more conventional parlance, a wood elf, a high elf, or a dark elf. There are a few reasons for this. One reason is, believe it or not, elves are not the most popular characters to play in Elder Scrolls. I want to do something a little bit different from convention. Humans of various races, primarily Nords and Bretons, seem to be the most popular. I don't want to do that. I'm not very interested in playing a beast race at the moment, though I have nothing against beast races. So yes, it will be either a wood elf, a high elf, or a dark elf, and there's a lot of flexibility with those races as well. More to the point, I am using Imperious races, and they all have very unique abilities, highly differentiated abilities, and in all likelihood, I'm going to be using that same mod author's Doomstones to give unique abilities to the race, to the character in question, rather. And these will be permanent birth signs. I'm a big believer, here's another thing, in character creation overhaul. I do think it makes a lot of sense, and I think it's sad that Bethesda let that go, that certain races are more inclined to certain things. It makes sense that a Bosmer, originally hailing from Valenwood, is more inclined towards the arts of stealth, wearing light armor, sneaking, archery, than, say, a high elf, who naturally would be more inclined towards magic. And then you have the sort of in-betweeners, if you will, the dark elves. That all makes sense, so I will be using that. That affects carry weight. And that also affects skills, so you'll be having major and more minor skills, and I think that makes the role-playing experience a lot more interesting. I will be using Percus Maximus, obviously. I want to really delve into the perks and the perk system. And I have 4 ideas that are set in stone, no, but these are the primary ideas I'm going to offer you, and I'm going to let you choose. 2 of them are already predetermined races. The other 2 are optional for all 3. And I'm going to explain each setup to you. Oh, and before I forget, I will be playing a male. I'm doing this because I've thought about things, and also had a conversation last night with Dirty Weasel Media. And we're talking about role-playing and what have you, and as much as I do not self-insert, I've said this many times, I don't play myself. To me, that's a ludicrous idea. I want to really go into the role-playing. I want to speak as if I were the character, and that's very difficult to do if I play a female for obvious reasons. I have a pretty deep baritone voice, and that's not going to work for a female, and it takes away from believability. So it will be a male. Of one of the 3 primary, I just would say elven races rather than mare. And yeah, so let me explain the scenario. Making full use of alternate start to create an interesting beginning and interesting background. The first choice is an outlaw, starting off as an outlaw, but not just any. This can go to any of the 3 races. This outlaw can be a high elf, a wood elf, or a dark elf. And his background will be that of an escaped criminal from his respective lands. So in the case of the Bosmer, he's an escaped criminal from Valenwood, or Valenwood, depending on how you wish to pronounce it. In the case of the High Elf, escaped criminal from the Somerset Isles. And in the case of the Dark Elf, he is an escaped criminal from Morrowind. And of course, there will be little tweaks and what have you to the stories, depending on whether I choose, or you choose, a escaped convict that is a high elf, a wood elf, or a dark elf. For example, in the case of the wood elf, he was already a bandit back in Valenwood, and engaged in lots of cutthroatery, murder, thievery. And let me add to this that this character would not be a pleasant personality. He would probably be very greedy, maybe power hungry, brutish to the point, and very impatient. In the case of the High Elf bandit, he would be someone who is formerly of the Thalmor Legion, if you will, a soldier, a deserter, who committed certain crimes, murder specifically, in the Somerset Isles and had to flee, and eventually hooked up with a group of bandits. And moving forward, he would be very dissatisfied with his station. And a not too dissimilar situation with the Dark Elf bandit or outlaw. He would, of course, also be a criminal. The exact details for him I haven't fleshed out, but you get the picture. So, all three races would be available to that. That's one of the ideas. Another idea, and this I would absolutely be a male Altmer, I think, would be a magical researcher as well as an explorer and naturalist. This would be a character that in all likelihood would start as a part of the faction in the College of Winterhold, a new arrival, and a character that's very struck by wanderlust, a character that wants to explore the world as much as he wants to research magic. He's all about exploration. And of course I would integrate things maybe like Wayfarer. You know, despite being a very magical character, he's still interested in the natural world. And ultimately, it's his wanderlust that takes him away from the college, even though he only recently arrived there, and sets him upon exploration. This would be, in terms of morality and ethics, quite the opposite. He probably would be a good-natured guy, inquisitive person, and not really evil by any means, if you want to use that terminology. And basically someone who just finds magic and the world and all the interactions of the world fascinating. So a researcher, an explorer, a naturalist. And for obvious reasons, this would be a very magical character. In the previous choices, it could go a bit of, probably just primarily warrior skills or rogue skills with some magic, but I'd have to see. But this would obviously be a very magic-heavy character, maybe with some concentration in a few other sectors. But yeah, so that would be another idea. The researcher, naturalist, and explorer mage effectively. The third idea I have would be that would be a dark elf. And one of the options that alternate start allows for is to start off in a tavern or a pub. And the cool thing about alternate start is that you can start off in a tavern in Solstheim. How interesting would that be, I thought to myself. A dark elf who basically spent all his life in Solstheim in doing menial work, menial labor, who really is undecided about who he is and what his skills are because he's quite young and has never really tested them out in the real world, and he just yearns to leave Solstheim. Of course, this presents a dilemma because you need to gather quite a bit of coin to even leave the island, and so that would be the beginning of a very interesting adventure and a very interesting character, I think. Someone who really isn't fleshed out very well, even to himself, and that allows for spontaneous development and what have you. Okay, and the final character I thought is also perhaps the most interesting and maybe even the one I'm most inclined to, although, you know, I'm inclined to all of them, and it could go for any race, and this would be a vampiric character. The alternate start allows you to start as a vampire, and this would be almost an amnesiac. He would be a character that was of some former station, and in playing the character, there would be a recreation of memories and a recollection of memories and trying to piece together what happened. And his development could go either way. He might reject vampirism and seek to cure himself, or he might embrace it and walk the path of darkness, if you will. And it could go either way in terms of race. It could go any way in terms of race. So I think Bosmer probably aren't that well suited to being a vampire, but I've heard that vampiric thirst allows for different play styles. Now, on the note of a vampiric character, I do want to mention that I'm probably going to be using vampiric thirst. I haven't tested it yet. There still needs to be testing done with all the mods. It's fairly stable at the moment, but some final tests need to be done. And with regards to vampires, I definitely see, based on this description, because I haven't used it, the advantages of vampiric thirst. It seems to me more flexible. One of my subscribers astutely commented and observed that it is true. Better vampires, which I've used since the days of yore, kind of straitjackets you into a sort of certain role as a vampire. I mean, you can't just play a brutish warrior. You can, but it doesn't really suit the whole sneaky, magical style that better vampires tends to almost force you in or push you in. According to the description, it's much more flexible. There are 29 abilities and or perks, however you want to describe them, and you can choose. So, in potentially even a Bosmer vampire would be possible, if only because of the flexibility of this mod. I do want to try it. I've used better vampires a lot of times. There tend to be a lot of conflicts. I'm hoping this one will be less conflict-free. For example, with better vampires, there is the issue of it overriding special racials, such as from a previous races or formerly of Skyrim redone, and then having to disable it and blah, blah, blah. I hope that's not the case. I do need to test it with Vampiric Thirst, but there are, of course, advantages with better vampires. I think, for example, the ability to turn NPCs and what have you, but I'm willing to forego some of those for a more interesting, customized kind of vampire if I end up playing this character at all. Which is, of course, going to depend on your vote. So I have to see if I find that Vampiric Thirst just isn't working for me. I'm just going to go back to better vampires. It is kind of a bit hackneyed and tried and true in a way, but you know, it's not. It's a great mod still. It has its limitations and it has its strengths, just as I imagine Vampiric Thirst would. Now, those are pretty much the choices. Oh, and of course, in terms of actual class abilities, as far as a vampire is concerned, that's going to depend very much on the racial background that I decide to integrate into this sort of amnesiac vampire trying to reconfigure his past. And he could end up going any way. He could reject vampirism, become a force for light and good, if you will, or walk the path of darkness. We'll have to see. So let me just recap there everything I've said. The three primary elven races, all male, those are the limitations. Either a high elf, a wood elf, or a dark elf. These, however, are not limited to the actual characters in terms of the outlaw, the runaway criminal setup that I have. It could be any of those three races. The naturalist, researcher, and explorer mage type character, if you will, that's definitely going to be a high elf. The dark elf stuck in Solstheim, it has to be a dark elf. It makes the most sense. Someone who's just trying to find himself and doesn't really know what his capabilities are or where he's going, and etc., etc. And so that way I could take his powers or his moral, ethical inclinations any way I decided as I progress through the game. And then finally, the vampiric start, a character that has been blessed or alternatively cursed with vampirism, depending on how you look at it or he looks at it, that is trying to recollect his memories, piece together his past, and at the same time forge his future, whether that path be a path of darkness or a path of light, or indeed somewhere in between. So you will decide this in terms of your commentary and input, which one I ultimately choose, which one I go with, and that will, of course, have some influence on the kind of skills I use. I mean, I'm as big as a mechanics person as I am in role-playing, and I actually want to role-play this character in a way I've never done before. I will actually be voicing the character, his thoughts out loud, and trying not to go too far off away from being the actual character to the best extent that I can. And, you know, depending on which I choose, it could be, just as an example, I will be ending the video soon. In case of the Bosmer runaway criminal, I could imagine he's the kind of type that shuns magic, even fears it. Even as much as he's a murderous brute, he doesn't like unnatural things, so he hates undead, and he's very inclined to more natural skills. You know, the use of swords or maybe hatchets, obviously archery, things of that nature, light armor. And of course, the high elf could probably be some sort of spell sword, and the dark elf could be somewhere in between, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of flexibility there. I wanted to get this video done before I actually start doing the final playtesting. And more importantly, I can then, depending on what character you decide for me or give input for, I can then decide on how I want to kind of hand tailor the mods that I'm using, because I can maybe find an extra mod or two that's better suited to it or what have you. And you see where I'm going with this. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. I kind of enjoyed explaining that all, and I look forward to your commentary and what you, the viewers, think would be the most interesting. And yeah, let me know in the comments. I'm looking forward to hearing from you, and I will see you soon. I'm going to stop this now and continue the mod testing and making sure everything is nice and safe and clean. And yeah, I'm looking forward to this playthrough. It should be quite interesting. Plan on doing it differently than I have ever previously done. So everyone take care, and as usual, may the gods watch over you. Bye-bye.